And it is a pleasure of mine to be able to welcome Dr. Paul Chamberlain. He's professor of philosophy and apologetics at Trinity Western University. He's also the director of the Institute of Apologetics there, and his wife Gail is here with him. Thank you for joining us as well this time. We've enjoyed Paul's presence, and now we get the better half, which is great. So, Paul, I'm going to invite you to come on up, and as he comes, I'll also let you know that A, he loves riding his motorcycle, and wish he was here with his motorcycle. This is perfect weather for it.
It is.
And B, Paul has some books for sale at the back, and I saw the prices, and I thought, it costs more than that to print a book, nearly. So, there are some great resources that are really, really like at cost or below based on the pricing I saw there. So thank you for making those available, and you can check those out. His book, Final Wishes, is one that we've been promoting because it's really pertinent to the discussion about physician-assisted suicide that's going on in Canada right now. I read it in 2006 as part of a bioethics course, and it was fabulous. It was a recommended reading for my, actually it was a required reading at McMaster Divinity College for bioethics. And so I've known of Paul, and now he's been here. I think this is probably your third time visiting us and being a part of that. So we're looking forward to what God is going to say through you today. And of course, as we mentioned as well, he'll be here tonight, 7 to 8:30, and Monday night, same thing, 7 to 8:30. You're welcome to come. There is childcare provided as well. I don't know if we mentioned that, but make sure that you come. It will be great. So Paul, without further ado,
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dave. It's just such a great pleasure to be back with you folks. I have great memories of the other times I was here, and I was always wishing I could have had my wife with me those days. I didn't, and I do now. Her name is Gail. She's right here in the front row. I think it would be appropriate for her to stand so you can see how tall she is. Right here in the front row. I think that would be a good idea. Thank you, honey. 37 years she's been hanging with me, and 37 great years. We're looking for some more, too. And where's my friend Alan Olson? Where's Alan? Is he somewhere here? Visiting. Alan visiting from Stony Plain. Alan and I go back even further than Gail and I go back, if you can believe this. We grew up as kids in the same town in Alberta. Our dads worked together. Alan's visiting, I'm visiting. Your church brought us together here today. It's the funniest thing. And he's got his sweet wife here too, who I didn't know as well, but I do know your family very well as well. Even some of them in Abbotsford. It is wonderful to be here working with Pastor Dave and Pastor Harry as well. Actually, I remember, Dave, the first time you and I met was in Kelowna. I forget what year that was now, 5 or 6 years ago. We ran a course in Kelowna. I taught it for a week-long course, an extension course from our university. And I think we had 16 students, something like that, and Dave was there with a group of a handful from the church here. And that's when Dave and I got to know each other. And I began to see right off, it didn't take long to realize that Dave was not just a passive student. He was a very active, participating student. If there was something I said that could be improved upon, Dave would let me know that, and we would make those improvements. And I say that not just jokingly, Dave, because I have to have a change in my notes, permanent change, because of something you told me. So every time I come across in a lecture or give in my classes, Dave told me that. And that's why that's in there. I had a list of 4 things that I thought were important, and Dave said, there's a 5th that's got to go in there. And I said, well, it's not meant to be exhaustive. I know, but that 5th really needs to be in there. I said, what's that? He gave it to me, and I said, I think it should. Dave said, yeah, it really should. And so it's in there. It's in there today, Dave, just so you know. I'll tell you more about it. But I really did enjoy Dave. I could tell right away Dave is a real thinker, a real thoughtful guy, and it says you all know that as well, and it's making a great contribution to you folks here. And Harry, I love your leadership here in this church. What this church is doing in Kamloops is really wonderful, because as you folks all know, most of us in the world of apologetics are quite familiar with what's going on in Kamloops, because various atheist groups across North America have attempted to, are planning to make Kamloops the atheist capital of Canada. And there's lots of activity going on in this city as a result of that. And some of you folks, and Colin and Kelly Matley are among them as well, engaging the atheist community in town here. And I think it's just great that you're doing so, and doing so in a very compassionate and careful but thoughtful and engaging fashion. I think it's just a way to go. And so I always consider it a privilege to come and be just a small part of what's going on here. You heard Dave's introduction of me. With a guy like Dave, you don't need to worry about this when you're the speaker, because he researches and he checks up on his facts, but sometimes people are introduced in very unusual ways and they don't know what to do with those introductions. I heard one speaker was introduced, and the MC who introduced him was trying to really build up the speaker. And he said all these different accolades about him. And he got to the end and he said, and the last thing I'm going to say about our speaker is he's a person who's made $5 million in oil. And that was, I guess, to impress the people. Well, when the speaker got up, he said, well, I do appreciate the introduction. There's a few corrections I feel like I need to make. First of all, it wasn't actually oil, it was lumber. It wasn't 5 million, it was 10 million. It wasn't actually even me, it was my brother. And third, he didn't make the money, he lost it. And so he had a few facts wrong in that introduction. Dave's facts were basically right on correct, and I appreciate Dave. As Dave mentioned, I've been at Trinity Western. We have something called an Institute for Christian Apologetics there. It's kind of an odd-sounding term, isn't it? Christian apologetics. I mean, you folks are probably more familiar with the term than many Christians are, but what does that mean? What does it mean to be involved in Christian apology? What does it sound like that you're saying when you say, I'm a Christian apologist? It's like you're learning how to develop the skill to say, I'm sorry, I'm a Christian, I won't let that happen again, or something like that. You're apologizing for being a Christian. Actually, the word apologetic, it's a very historic word. It comes from an old Greek word. It's in the New Testament, from 1 Peter chapter 3:15, when Peter said, always be ready to give a reason for your faith, for the hope you have, and give an account for that. The word was apologia. You can hear the resemblance. That's the word from which we get our word apologetic. And it goes back further. One of Plato's dialogues, the philosopher Plato, way back 400 years before Jesus, is called the apology, the apologia. The word meant defense, to give a defense for something. And you can be an apologist for just about anything you want to, but if you want to be an apologist for Christianity, you were often called a Christian apologist. It's an old term, way back in the early days of Christianity. Different people rose up and began making charges and allegations against Christianity, against Christian faith. And some of them are pretty unusual, at least by our standards today. You can read about some of these on the internet, as a matter of fact. For instance, Christians at the very beginning were sometimes charged with being cannibals. You may say, well, why? Why think Christians were cannibals? Well, because people would say they're going into those meetings, we don't know what they're doing in those meetings, but we have heard they follow a person who said, unless you do what? Eat my body, my flesh, drink my blood, you have no part with me. John chapter 6, you can read it all right there. So maybe they're cannibals. And so Christian apologists rose up and began to respond to this and many other allegations that came against Christianity. We simply stand in that same tradition today. And when people make charges and allegations against Christianity, against Christian faith, about reasons why they simply cannot believe, and today there's a whole wave of Christian leaders both in the church and in the academic institutions, walking away from the faith and becoming some of the most ardent critics of it. When they level their charges, it's Christian apologists who rise up and begin to respond to those, and it really is a wonderful opportunity to be involved in that. To some degree, we are all involved in it when we engage others in our across the back fence with comments about Jesus and about our faith. And most of us aren't going to become professional apologists, but we can all move ourselves up one notch in our ability to share with others. And that's why I would personally invite you to come to our sessions this evening and tomorrow evening when we get into some really interesting questions there. In fact, I really want to commend your church for holding a weekend like this. We often call these weekends devoted to the question of how to respond to secular perspectives on Christian faith. And we ask a lot of questions that you will face and have faced already if you are willing to engage others. For instance, let me just ask you, how many have ever had anyone come up to you and say, you're a Christian, right? Well, how can you say Jesus is the only way? Anybody ever heard that question? That's pretty common, isn't it? And it usually goes with a couple of other questions like, that just seems so arrogant. Isn't that intolerant? Who are you to think you have a monopoly on truth? Well, we're going to be talking a little bit about that this morning, and then again tomorrow evening we'll get into it in a little different way. But it's connected with this question as well. How many have heard this question? Don't all religions lead to God? That's pretty common thinking in our culture, isn't it? It seems very tolerant to make a statement like that. Well, what do we say? What kind of response do we give those of us who follow Jesus and the things he said? How about this one? If God is so good, why do bad things happen to good people? Wow, that's one that's been around for a long time. We're actually going to deal with that in the second service here this morning. That's one we're going to be talking about there. Or this question here, maybe you've heard this one. This is our topic for this evening here in the church this evening. Is it religion, all of it, including Christianity, isn't it the cause of violence? In fact, we have a term, religious violence. Maybe you've heard that term before. Isn't religion the cause of violence, even of wars, and of an anti-scientific mentality, and the cause of intolerance and things like this? In fact, one of the main spokespersons who makes this charge, his name is Richard Dawkins, probably one of the most, probably the most well-known atheist today, a British scientist, and others as well. One man whose name was Christopher Hitchens, who died a couple of years ago now. Dr. Daniel Dennett, and Sam Harris, another one as well, and there's others as well. But they make the charge, and they've made the charge for some time. They're called New Atheists. That religion, including Christianity, is a force for evil in the world. It's a dangerous force. And in fact, if you ever had let some of the people like this, who were religious extremists, get their hands on weapons of mass destruction, we wouldn't lose simply a building here or there, we would lose a city here or there. So the best thing that can happen to the world is if we could eradicate religion from the world, for the very survival of the human race. This is the strongest way some of these are put, or at least for people to maybe believe in their religion, but not to act as though these things are true, to behave as though they were not true. Something like that. The question is, how do we respond to people who say religion, including Christianity, is just a force for evil in the world? It's something we'll be looking at tonight. And I would really invite you to come, because I would just say ask you this: what do we do when we hear questions like this and others like that? Do we freeze up? Do we look for a hole to crawl into? Do we wish we had a better answer to questions like this? Well, my experience has been that few things are more exciting than to face some of these questions squarely and to discover that there are good and effective responses we can use, which can help us. They can encourage our own faith with God. They can help us to understand and deepen our understanding of the knowledge of God. They can help us provide assistance to others as they wrestle with the same kinds of questions. So again, I would personally invite you to join us tonight, and tomorrow we'll have handout notes and PowerPoint presentation and highlight key ideas along the way. Dave has mentioned these books that are here in the back. Let me just take a second and let you know what's in them, because it's been a great privilege I've had over the years to write these books. It's a dream I had a long time ago. I wonder if I'd ever be able to write a book. And then I looked around and I thought, do we need more books in the world? There's already quite a few books out there. Maybe we don't need too many more. Then I came to Trinity Western and found out they encourage us to publish into research. And so let me just tell you what's in this one, within these briefly. This one's called Can We Be Good Without God? The first book I wrote, it's based on a debate I was involved in at the UBC with the professor there, and they entitled the debate this very title. And I've had a couple of others on the very same title as well. Can we be good without God? And really just asks two questions. Is there such a thing as real, objective, moral truth in the world? Or is morality purely a relative thing? Is it relative and subjective? What's wrong for one person may be right for somebody else? Or is there any objective, foundational moral truth out there? And assuming there is God required as a foundation for it? Now, interestingly, in that debate I was involved in, I find people are interested to know that both the atheist and I agreed right up front. There is objective moral truth. And I find many atheists who teach in philosophy are very happy to admit and to have the belief that there is objective moral truth there. They know that there's a real difference between the actions of a Mother Teresa, let's say, and an Adolf Hitler on the other hand. But when it came to the foundations for it, of course, the atheist said God is not required, God is not necessary, and that's what the debate was all about. This book covers those same few questions in a dialogue format, and so that's what that one's about. Book Final Wishes is what Dave mentioned. This is a book that came as a result of a series of dialogues and debates I was involved in way back with Sven Robinson a number of years ago, and then a few more since then as well. Sven Robinson at the time was pushing very hard for the legalization of assisted suicide. He was spending time with a woman whose name was Sue Rodriguez, some of you may remember that. At the same time, my own mother had multiple sclerosis, and I watched her go through the very same kind of degenerative process that Sue Rodriguez was going through, and my mother eventually died of the disease at age 73 after having had it for 34 years. And I looked at this and I thought, across the country, there are people who really strongly believe that people in this kind of situation should have the freedom to make the choice, to have a physician help them end their lives. Others feel very, very strongly against it. And so this book is an attempt to actually set out the views on the issues on this. And of course now our government and our Supreme Court, first of all, has made the decision to strike down the prohibitions against it. Our government is right now, this weekend, in the process of getting a law to the Senate. The Senate says they will not be able to have it ready in time, so I'm not sure what will exactly happen with that. But that's a book that works on that topic issue for you. Then there's this one here, Talking About Good and Bad Without Getting Ugly. I'm not sure if you could come up with a title like that. That's not something I'd be able to come up with. The one I sent in seemed to be quite a bit more boring than this one, I guess, for the publishers. And I did learn the difference, though, between a publisher and a terrorist when I sent this book in, by the way. The difference, you know what the difference is? You can actually negotiate with a terrorist. That is the difference between the two. The publisher came back and said, look, well, we know what you're trying to do in this book. It's all about engaging others. And that's what the book's about, engaging others on matters of moral issues and some faith issues. How do we do it? Especially when we have certain things in our culture that are said, like, you're a religious person, right? You have no right to impose your religious morals and values on the rest of us, right? What do we say about that? That is a way of shutting down an entire viewpoint, just like that, without even an argument about what's wrong with it. But yet there seems to be a kernel of truth to it. So we have a chapter called Thou Shalt Not Impose. And there are some other chapters like that that deal with specific issues like that. And then this one here, Why People Don't Believe, is a book that gets into these specific issues we talked about just a moment ago. Isn't religion, including Christianity, a dangerous force for evil in the world? This one sets out the charges and responds to them. This one responds to that issue. So that's what these 4 books are about, and they're at the back table if you have an interest in those. We got to buy them from the publisher directly, so we get a better price on them, and so that's how we have them back there at those prices. This morning, though, I'd like to turn our attention to the question, how do we tell the story of Jesus in a pluralistic world? How do we do that? How do we tell the story of Jesus in a pluralistic world? And let me just begin by reminding you of a couple of questions I've asked you a little bit this morning. We've all heard questions like, how can you say Jesus is the only way to God? We've heard those questions, haven't we? And to some people, it seems so arrogant to make a statement like that. In other words, good news, what we thought was good news, is turned into bad news. It's turned into arrogant news, intolerant news, exclusivistic news. We have all these words we throw around. And then the question comes back, who are you, Christian, to claim you have a monopoly on truth? To say people of all those other faiths out there are not finding God and spirituality in their own way. It's what I call the challenge of religious pluralism. It's something we live with, and we have, and we need to think about how to respond in it. And maybe you've even asked these questions yourself. And if you have, I would say to you, there's no shame in admitting that. In fact, I think it could be dangerous to you not to admit and explore these questions if you have. But let me just say, the challenge of religious pluralism is upon us today in full force. And in a very real sense, given the way our society has changed over the last 50 or 60 years or so, I think it would be very odd if it were not. We've become very multicultural, have we not? That's what our society has become. In fact, we always have been in one sense. But we've become even more so, it seems to me, over the years. If you walk down the streets of Vancouver, for example, you may as well be walking down the halls of the United Nations. There are so many nationalities out there. The street that we live in Abbotsford is a good example of that. Different nationalities all around us. The street we just moved from a few years ago, we counted the kids out there one day, 37 kids, and it might as well have been the United Nations playground because of all the places in the world that those families have had originated. And all these young people, the people who come to our country, are bringing their cultural and religious perspectives with them. And the natural question that arises is this: with all these other religious perspectives out there, who are you, North American Christian, to think your views, especially your religious views, are the only right ones? They represent the only true way to God. And don't forget, you're not the only game in town anymore, if you ever were. Now, not only that, but in our culture, we have come to place a high value on values, principles like tolerance and relativism, which have produced the idea that we should accept all views roughly as equal, especially when it comes to things like religion and ethics, and we should refrain from looking across the way and calling some views true and others false. Again, to do that would be arrogant and exclusionary. But there's even more to it. As Dr. Alan Bloom brought out in a book a number of years ago called The Closing of the American Mind, and I'm sure some of you have seen that book or heard of it. He brought us an American philosopher who brought out the idea that, he said, the idea that you and I could have real objective truth. I just mean the old-fashioned kind of truth which says some statements are correct and others, the opposite of those, are false. The idea that you could have that kind of objective, real truth in these matters of religion and matters of faith, are seen by huge numbers of people across the Western world as simply a dangerous idea. Not just problematic and hard to achieve maybe, but dangerous. You may say, well, what's dangerous about objective truth? Well, Adam Bloom went on to say, he said, in the minds of many people, the idea of real objective truth leads people to say things like, I'm right, because I have some objective truth. Which means that if you disagree with me, it's not just a disagreement anymore. If I'm right, it means you're wrong. And in the minds of many people, it's that attitude, I'm right, which means you are wrong. That's what causes some of our biggest problems in the world. Problems like war, and bigotry, and racism, and imperialism, and imposing people's moral values, and worldviews, and perspectives on other people. And so the new goal, Alan Bloom said, is not to search for truth. That's not why many people go to university anymore, to search for truth. The new goal is to get rid of the very idea of truth altogether, and to speak of perspective instead, rather than truth. So now we don't simply speak of this is true, but this is rather my perspective, or possibly it's my truth, which is another way of saying my perspective. And to exalt tolerance as the new ultimate virtue, the virtue by which everything else is measured and judged. Now, in the midst of this then, think about this now, multiple cultures all around us, a variety of ideas and perspectives on religion and faith, tolerance being an ultimate moral virtue in our culture, truth being considered somewhat dangerous or at least suspect. Along comes the Christian, you and me, the person still contending for the faith once for all delivered to the saints, and says, by the way, folks, I've got a message for you. It comes from our founder, Jesus, who said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And his followers, his apostles, they said it too. They said, there is no other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. And way back in those epistles, 1 Timothy, the Apostle Paul wrote, there is one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus, and it goes on. And it's not hard to see, is that why these are fighting words in a culture like ours. These are hard truths for many people in our culture. And the question I want to ask this morning is, how do we tell the story of Jesus? How do we communicate the Christian gospel in an age of pluralism? Well, this morning let me offer 7 steps that I think should be part of any attempt to communicate the message of Jesus to the world. 7 steps. And the first is just this. That is about as practical as you could get. Let's make it difficult for people to label you and me as arrogant or intolerant people. What are we getting at here? Well, remember the point is that when you and I hold up Jesus as unique, the natural reaction from some people is, who do you think you are? How arrogant, how intolerant can you get? You think you have a monopoly on truth? And I would just say the first thing we can do is to make it very difficult for people to label you and me as arrogant or intolerant people. Remember what Peter said in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. After urging Christians to be ready with reasons for the hope, he went on and immediately called his readers, and God is calling us through that as well, to do so with an attitude of gentleness and respect and with a clear conscience. And he went on to say this, so much so that those who speak maliciously about your good behavior in Jesus may be ashamed of their slander. In other words, their criticisms of you will be so obviously misplaced once they check you out that they'll be made to look silly and ashamed. In other words, can we make it really, really difficult for people to label us as arrogant people? See, this has to do with how we hold the truth we do, the attitude with which we hold on to express our beliefs. And if we come across as arrogant or intolerant, it just seems to me we lend a lot of credence to the idea that Christianity really is an arrogant and intolerant faith. We make it real easy for people to say, yeah, I think Christianity is arrogant. I think it's intolerant. If you don't believe me, just look at that Christian right over there. And that one right over there. Look at him. Look at her. On the other hand, if we are respectful of other people and of their right to hold their views, if we're courteous to them, if we're welcoming of dialogue, then at least we put people in a position where they're forced to say something like, yeah, Christianity may seem that way. It may seem exclusive and arrogant to talk about this one-way idea. But that Christian I met over there, he sure doesn't come across that way. And neither does that one over there. And what have we done if we get people to say or to think that? I think we've confused a stereotype. We've shown some grace, and we've shown openness. We've shown a life beyond reproach when a person was expecting arrogance or intolerance. Let's just make it real difficult for people to label us as arrogant or intolerant. I think this point is far more powerful than we often give it credit for. Let me go to a second step, and it's this. Let's learn a lesson from the Apostle Paul, the book of Acts chapter 17. We won't read this passage now, but it's a very well-known passage in the book of Acts, where Paul is in Athens, and he goes to a place called the Areopagus. And he speaks to a group of philosophers there. It's a place where all the latest ideas were discussed in that day. And at that place, there were many views, and there were many gods represented there. It was a very pluralistic situation. And the Apostle Paul was walking around town, and he was talking about a person who had died, and he was risen again from the dead. Now, is that not a new idea? Rising from the dead? I mean, if I was to ask you, what are the two things we thought we knew for certain? What are they? Death and what? Taxes, yeah. We thought we knew both those for certain. When you die, you stay dead. That's one of them. Well, here is this very educated person, Paul, walking around the city of Athens, telling people about a person who he knew of, who had died and risen again from the dead. That's a new idea. So they brought Paul up to the Areopagus and said, tell us about this new idea you have. And what did Paul do when he got there? Well, first of all, let me say what he did not do. He did not immediately condemn everything they believed, their gods and their views, as I suppose he could have if he would have wanted to go that route. Rather, he looked for a point of contact, a point of agreement, what I would call a bridge. He looked for a bridge from himself to others. And it's almost as if he walked around town until he found one. Remember what he found? He said, as I walked around your city, I found an idol. Can you tell me what this idol was? It said an idol to an unknown God. Remember that? He says, I saw that idol there. He says, and it says, I see you were a very religious people. I saw that idol there. It's almost like he's commending them. He's not quite commending them, I don't think, because of other things said in the text. But he focused on that one idol to an unknown God. And said, let me tell you who that God is. The one by your own admission, you do not know, because you said right there, it's to an unknown God. And from there, he began talking about Jesus, and then the resurrection, exactly where he wanted to get to. You see, I think there's a lesson for us there. Let's look for a point of contact when we can as well. What might that be? Well, maybe it's a common belief in God. Maybe it's a struggle with suffering and evil. Who in this world doesn't struggle with suffering and evil in our world? We, every one of us in this room does it in some way. Our neighbors do as well. Or maybe it's something else that we could point to. Some of you may have heard of the missionary Don Richardson. How many of you know that name? He wrote a book called The Peace Child, and there's a little movie, a little film called The Peace Child. Fairly well known at one point as a Canadian, I thought I was going to say Canadian missionary. He trained in Canada, but he's actually, I think, an American. But he he took his family to the Sawi people in Indonesia a number of years back to tell them about the gospel of Jesus, to tell them about Jesus and his disciples and the whole story. And it's almost kind of humorous what happened, because there's a little film made of this, and I've read the book called The Peace Child and seen the film as well. And when you watch it, it really is a gripping story. But it shows Don Richardson with the people there, telling them after he began to get to know the people and learn how to communicate with them, and he's sitting around a circle, and he's telling the story of Jesus and the story of him being betrayed by Judas, and then being killed, but yet being the Son of God and being killed and being betrayed, and the whole story. And when he got all done the story, the people all cheered. Guess who they cheered for? Anybody know? Judas. Judas was the hero of the story. Well, that really backfired, didn't it? Judas wasn't supposed to be the hero of the story. And Richardson said, well, I need to figure this thing out again. I need to figure out a new way to tell the story. And he looked around in the group of tribes that were there, and he found this practice that he called the practice of the peace child, where one tribe would have a baby born in it, and they would get together with another tribe, and they would have a very public ceremony when that baby was held up in the air and transferred from one tribe to another, and it would be raised over there. And they'd have one raised and transferred over here as well. And they would do that back and forth with different tribes in the whole area. And the point behind this practice was it was a very rudimentary device, a strategy to try to keep down bloodshed and war, because you knew if you ever went to war with that tribe, you might be killing some of your own people. That was what they had. They had this thing figured out. And Don Richardson said, couldn't Jesus be seen as the ultimate peace child? And he told the story that way, all around. And people in those areas became Christians as a result of that. I thought all he did is look very hard for the point of contact, the bridge, and he figured out a way to communicate the same story by looking around. I had students a short time ago in a class I teach called Culture and Christianity do a presentation for me on the movie, the blockbuster Star Wars. The whole collection of the movie is called the Star Wars. And the whole theme in their presentation was, we see a theme of redemption in Star Wars. We think the Star Wars movie could be a vehicle through which we could communicate the gospel of Jesus to the people in our culture, because many people in our society are quite illiterate about the Bible. But huge numbers of people have seen the Star Wars movie. And there's a redemptive theme in the Star Wars that we can capitalize to build on to move from there to the story of Jesus. I thought, I don't know if it's going to work or not, but I really commend you guys for trying. It was actually a father-son team taking this course, and they did the presentation together. I thought, they're trying to find a point of contact to bring a message of truth to the world. And if we can learn that from Paul, look for a point of contact to communicate the message of Jesus. Let me go to step 3 here, and that is this. Let us emphasize the exclusivity, the exclusiveness of Christianity, how and when we should, but not how and when we should not. You say, well, what does that mean? My question is this. Is it possible to emphasize exclusivity too much or in the wrong way? Is that possible? Let's think about that. It's kind of a maybe we're not sure how we want to answer that question, are we? Because it's a very sensitive matter, sensitive question. But it's probably possible to do anything in the wrong way or anything too much, isn't it? Well, let's take another look at Paul's approach in Acts chapter 17. Here he was in this highly religiously pluralistic environment. There were all these other gods and worldviews and faiths galore all around him. Here was Paul in the midst of all this, on the hot seat, wanting to present Jesus as unique, as the one true way to God. And tell me again, did he come on like gangbusters and say, all these other gods and idols of yours have got to go? Most of your beliefs have got to go too. They're all false. There's only one true way to God. It's the way I'm going to tell you right now. Did he come on like that? No. If you read Acts 17, you don't see that. That was not his approach. His approach really was about as positive as you could get, while not losing sight of the message he had to tell, because in the midst of it all, he simply pointed his audience to Jesus as the way to come to God. He simply went right to Jesus after talking about the one who made the universe and the heavens and set the people in their places, and then he moved to talk about Jesus. In other words, the exclusivity issue was never brought up. Interestingly, you find this elsewhere as well. If you read Acts chapter 19, when Paul went to Ephesus, and some of you will remember this story as well. Remember the story where Paul spread the message in the city of Ephesus, and he invited people to become followers of Jesus, and in fact, many people did so. In fact, so many people did so in the city of Ephesus, that when they did, they turned away from worshiping the main goddess that the people of Ephesus worshiped, the goddess Artemis, if you remember the story. And this began to affect the sales and the business of people who produced idols to the goddess Artemis. And so their sales dropped. And so they incited a riot, a big citywide riot. This is a very serious situation. People get hurt in riots. And they accused Paul and his companions of leading the people astray here. But notice what happened, if you read the story. When the city clerk managed to calm the crowd and address the people, what did he say? His message, and this is from the other side now, was this. These men have not blasphemed our goddess. Read it, Acts chapter 19, verse 37. They didn't do that, and he picked up on that. In other words, his goal was pure and simple. It was not to blaspheme their goddess. His goal was to simply invite people to follow Jesus, and that is what he did. And I think we can learn from Paul here on this. You see, Christianity is often, well, let me just ask you this. Is Christianity first and foremost, let me ask you this question. Is it first and foremost a condemnation of all other ways to God and spirituality? Is that what Christianity is? No, it's not, is it? Is it first and foremost a condemnation of all other lifestyles that the Bible does not approve of? No, that's not what it is. What is it first and foremost? It is primarily an invitation to people to come to the one who can connect them to God, that is Jesus. It is a positive message. It is good news. Now, of course, the implication is, if Jesus is the way to God and to true spirituality, if you will, then we need to say that other so-called ways are false, and we need to say that when we need to make that clear, but not when we don't. One of the best ways I can think of this is just this. Suppose after the service, some of us walked out here, just outside the church, and we saw a car coming down the street, and it kind of was turned this way a little bit, and then turned that way. I saw a person just like this yesterday, and I'm sure we all have. And it stopped, and then started again, and he came by the church, he got closer and closer. Suddenly you look at the car and you see Saskatchewan plates. Now I know what's going on. They're trying to figure out how to get out of here and where they're supposed to go. So you walk over to the sidewalk and you just hold up your finger, and the person comes over, and they roll up the door in their window, and you say, or the window's already rolled down a day like today, and you say, can I help you, please? And the person says, yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to get to Vancouver from here. Now, what are you going to say at that point? Are you going to say, okay, see that side road right there? And say, yeah, don't take that road. Okay, see that little other one, that little alleyway goes winding through there, is it kind of a dead end? Yeah, don't take that one either. Okay? Look in your mirror, you see back there? Don't take that one. Are you going to go through all the ways not to take? You're not going to, are you? You're simply going to pick out the way they need to go to get to Vancouver, and you're going to tell them that. That's what we're going to do. And it seems to me the same principle applies with what we're saying here, because my observation is this: in our culture, we as Christians have been charged quite often with exclusivity. The whole Christian message to some people seems so arrogant, it seems so intolerant. And how we responded? By emphasizing even more this negative exclusivity, more than the positive invitational dimension, which is really what the gospel message is. I don't see Paul doing that. I don't think we should do it either. And I guess the bottom line for me is that the Christian gospel is first and foremost a positive invitation. And let's not allow anybody to take that away from us. So that is our message. Let me go to step number 4. And it's just this: let us be armed with at least one good reason why a person should consider the Christian gospel. Do we have anything to say? Can we carry out what Peter said, 1 Peter 3:15? Always be ready to give a reason, to give an account for the hope that you have. This is the why question. Why are you a Christian? Why do you go to church? Why do you worship? Why do you pray? Do we have any answer to that? Peter said, always be ready with something. Remember, even Jesus, in that 40-day period after he rose from the dead and before he ascended to heaven, it says in Acts 1, he spent time with his disciples doing what? Giving them many convincing proofs that he had risen from the dead. He armed them with reasons to give to the world around them. When he sent them out with a message this unusual, a person has died and risen again from the dead, claimed to be the Son of God, lifted off, ascended back into heaven. That's the message we need to communicate to the world. Jesus did not send his disciples out without giving them many convincing proofs. And there's many ways you could do this. We can talk about the existence of God for some who do not believe in God possibly. Or we can talk about the resurrection of Jesus. That was the main message of the early Christians. We can talk about the New Testament documents, which tell us about Jesus, his life and his teaching. You can even give your own personal story, your own personal experience. These are powerful in giving people a reason as to why you are a follower of Jesus. You know what I like to focus in on? I like to focus in on Jesus and the New Testament and simply ask a person, have you read the Gospel of John or the Gospel of Mark? And you don't need to think of these as the Bible or as Christian scriptures. That's a way too big a mouthful for the moment. Just think of them as historical records written about Jesus by people who were close to him. They can tell you about Jesus. And when you read these, would you not agree with me that you'll see Jesus is not the least bit like almost anybody else who's ever lived? He is totally unique. There is no other like him. His teaching, no one else taught the things he taught. And he lived out his ethical teaching to the ultimate degree. No other person in the world, whether great teachers or on down to the rest of us, have ever lived out our ethical teaching fully, but Jesus himself did. In fact, if you read those texts, it'll tell you that Jesus predicted his own death and resurrection and then pulled that off. Now, if he did these things, it means he is unique. Unique people can make unique claims. You see, can we give anybody a reason for believing something as unusual as we're telling them in our world around us? Step number 5 is just this. Let's have one foot in the Word and one in the world. One foot in the Word and one foot in the world. This is an admonition given by Haddon Robinson, as a man who wrote a book called Biblical Preaching quite a long time ago. He wrote it for preachers, and he was saying to preachers, if you're going to be able to preach well, you need to do that. You need to have a foot in the Word so you understand the text that you're preaching. But you need to have a foot in the world as well so you understand the culture to which you are taking this message, so you can communicate it in a way that really scratches where people itch. All I would say to us today is that if that's true for preachers, it's true for the rest of us as well, because we need to be doing the same thing, taking the same message to the people around us, so we can communicate it in a way that really will be impactful when we communicate it to people. Let me go to step number 6, and it's this. Let us also remember the inclusive dimension to the Christian gospel. See what we're getting at here? We often hear that Christianity is exclusive, and it kind of comes as a negative term. Let's remember that if we're going to use that term, let's also use the term inclusive, because as was pointed out to me a number of years ago after a lecture I gave by a lady who listened to it, she came to me and said, Paul, we need to also remember that the gospel invitation is inclusive. It is given to all. Whosoever will may come. Everyone comes to God, and they come in the same way, regardless of who you are, regardless of your socioeconomic position, regardless of where you live, what you've been taught, what you currently believe. There's a wonderful inclusiveness to this, and let us not forget, it's a very powerful idea. Paul said the same thing in Galatians 3 when he said, in Jesus there is neither Jew nor Gentile, there's neither male nor female, there's neither slave nor free. All are one in Christ Jesus. Galatians chapter 3, verse 28. And let me go to the seventh step, and that's this. Let me just encourage us to remind our audience, the people we talk to, of this one idea. An idea that sometimes we may forget, but it's really important. And that is this. This is not my message, the idea that Jesus is the way to come to God. It's not something I invented. You see, once in a while, we'll hear people come and say, you know, there's a lot of things about Christianity that we can appreciate, that we like. But just that one idea that you keep telling us that Jesus is the only way, can you lighten up on that one point? As though somehow you and I have the prerogative to lighten up on that. Well, the fact is, we need to just remind our audiences, this is not my message. We didn't invent it. We have no prerogative to change it. All we're trying to do is simply represent the message as accurately as we can, and I guess I'd even add to it. What kind of friend would I be to you if I led you to believe there are other ways of coming to God, when really I have no reason to think there are? Let's go back to that illustration for just a moment about driving and giving directions here. What if, after sharing with that person the way to get to Vancouver, you say, this is what you need to do. Take that road, make that turn, go right back there. Yeah, that'll get you on highway number 1, and you'll be back there. You'll be number 5, and you'll be back there. What if after doing all that, the person says, you mean you're telling me I got to go down that road? And you say, yeah, that would be the way to go. And what if the person says, I don't like that road? You say, what don't you like about it? What's too many potholes? It's way too congested. I just don't like going on that road. What are you going to say at that point? You're going to say, well, okay, I guess then you can go that way, even though you know full well that'll never get them to Vancouver. Are you going to say that? Probably not. If you want to be a true friend of that person, you're probably going to say something like this. Hey, my friend, if you want to get to Vancouver, this is the way I would tell you to go. You're probably going to continue to say that. And I would just say this to us as well. We are not being true friends either if we point people down the wrong road to Jesus just because we know that's what they want to hear. Let's be a true friend. Thanks, and God bless you all. Let's have a moment of prayer here. Our Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for an opportunity we have to communicate the greatest message in the world to the people around us. You placed us here, you placed us with our contacts and with our friendships, and many ways of communicating and living out and expressing a message that you are the Savior of the world, and you love the people of the world you created. You care about us all. I pray that you'll give us opportunities, you'll tap us on the shoulder, give us the words to say, give us confidence, and give us joy. Thank you for each person who is here today.